Good morning, students. Till date, whatever hormones we learned regarding calcium homeostasis, like parathormone 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, are meant for increasing blood calcium level by different ways. So they are mainly secreted in state of hypocalcemia. Hypocalcemia is one of the major trigger for their secretion. But in today's class, we are going to discuss a hormone which is secreted whenever there is increased level of blood calcium, and its main aim is to reduce blood calcium level by various means. So let us focus on that specific hormone, that is calcitonin. We will learn today role of calcitonin in calcium homeostasis and other hormones which also contribute in different ways in maintenance of calcium homeostasis in our body. So let us start with today's topic. What are the specific learning objectives of today's class? We will learn through this class the source, chemical nature, mechanism of action of calcitonin, physiological roles of calcitonin, clinical uses of it, and we will focus briefly on contribution of other hormones which are not actually calcitropic hormone, but they contribute in various ways for the maintenance of calcium homeostasis. We will learn about them also. So with these learning objectives, let us begin today's class. So first of all, calcitonin. Calcitonin is a peptide hormone. It contains 32 amino acid with a molecular weight of 3500, and this polypeptide hormone is synthesized by the parafollicular cells of thyroid gland. You know, thyroid gland basically secretes T3, T4, reverse T3. So this is another hormone which is also synthesized by thyroid gland, but the specific cell type which is responsible for its synthesis is parafollicular cells. So calcitonin, a 32 amino acid containing polypeptide hormone secreted from the parafollicular cells of thyroid gland, released into the bloodstream and reaches the target organ in various parts of the body. Specific target organs are bones, kidney mainly, and in this situation, in the target cells, calcitonin exerts its action via different cell surface receptors. As it is a polypeptide hormone, it is hydrophilic. It is not lipid soluble, so cannot cross cell membrane. So it has to exert its action through the cell surface receptor, and that receptor is coupled with GS protein, and whenever it is stimulated by the attachment of the hormone at outside the cell membrane with the receptor, it stimulates adenylyl cyclase enzyme, which ultimately leads to formation of cyclic AMP, which is specific second messenger for calcitonin hormone. Now after the formation of second messenger cyclic AMP, the specific desired action is achieved through the cells. Now this is the mechanism of action of calcitonin along with its source. Now what are the stimulus for its synthesis? The major stimulus, which has already been mentioned at the beginning of the class, is a state of hypercalcemia. Whenever the blood calcium level reaches more than 9 milligram percent, normal value you know 9 to 11 milligram percent, but when the blood calcium level exceeds 9 milligram percent, calcitonin starts to get secreted and it linearly increases with increasing blood calcium level, and it leads to different physiological activities which ultimately lead to reduction in the blood calcium level and maintains its normalcy. Not only increased blood calcium level, there are other stimulus for calcitonin release also that I am going to discuss in the subsequent slides. Now, one thing deserves to be mentioned, that not only calcitonin, there is another substance, proteinous substance called CGRP, or calcitonin gene related protein. What is that? Calcitonin gene related protein is a polypeptide which is also synthesized by the same gene which transcribes calcitonin also. So, the genetic background, genetic source for calcitonin and CGRP is the same. The same gene transcribes for the messenger RNA of calcitonin as well as mRNA for CGRP. So, it is called calcitonin gene related protein, and both of these substances, calcitonin and CGRP, acts as co-transmitter into the central nervous system, and they somehow help to block pain transmission. So, in different intractable pain related situation, like in pain of malignancy or different chronic type of pain, often tried to be tackled with CGRP along with calcitonin. So, calcitonin and CGRP basically are found to be involved in reduction in pain transmission into the brain, which is independent of opioid system, which you will learn later, that brain analgesia system involves opioid neurotransmitters, and opioids system is there which is responsible for reduction in the pain transmission in our body. So, it is an inherent analgesic system. CGRP and calcitonin also acts in the similar way but independent of that. Now, after learning about the source, mechanism of action, let us focus on the factors stimulating calcitonin release. I have also already mentioned that major stimulus for calcitonin release is increased blood calcium level, that is more than 9 milligram per dl. Whenever there is increased blood calcium, calcitonin gets released and it acts in various ways to reduce blood calcium. The main target organ being bones, specifically the osteoclasts. Other stimulus for calcitonin release are beta adrenergic agonists as well as gastrointestinal hormones like gastrin, CCK, that is cholecystokinin, secretin, etc. It has been found that whenever a person intakes food, there occurs a tendency for postprandial hypercalcemia, but that is prevented effectively by release of calcitonin simultaneously by the action of different gastrointestinal hormones, that is also released after food being stimulated by food intake, gastrin, CCK, secretin. They also stimulate release of calcitonin, and calcitonin tackles postprandial hypercalcemia. It has been found that in Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, as there is excessive secretion of gastrin, calcitonin level also get increased. So, GI hormones are stimulus for calcitonin release. Another neurotransmitter, that is dopamine, also stimulates calcitonin release. So, these are the stimuli for calcitonin release. The most potent stimulus for calcitonin release is hypercalcemia, that is blood calcium level more than 9 milligram per dl. So, stimulus for calcitonin release. Next, we will learn what are the major functions of calcitonin. The main function of calcitonin is to maintain calcium homeostasis. I have already mentioned that its main role is to reduce blood calcium level by its action on different target organs like bones, like kidney. In the bones, calcitonin exerts its main action on osteoclasts. How does it help to reduce the blood calcium level? Here in this flow chart, I have shown you how the calcitonin actually exerts its action. Whenever being secreted by increased blood calcium level, calcitonin comes in the circulation, it exerts its action on bone as well as on kidney. On the bone, calcitonin mainly acts on the osteoclasts and reduces its activity, and thereby bone resorption gets reduced. We know that osteoclasts, whenever gets activated, it becomes ruffled at one border and gets attached with the bone surface, and there occurs a formation of resorption pocket where the dissolution of bones occurs and the bone calcium comes into blood to restore the blood calcium level. This is the action of parathyroid hormone, we have learned. But when there is calcitonin release, under the influence of calcitonin, what happens? The activated osteoclast loses their ruffled border, and thereby it can no longer remain attached with the bone surface, and their activity to dissolve the bone, to dissolute the bone, gets curtailed, gets diminished. So the osteoclasts which are already activated loses their activation, and the ones which are not at all activated yet cannot further get activated to cause bone resorption. So ultimately the osteoclastic bone resorption gets hugely reduced by the action of that is calcitonin. That means calcitonin, by acting on bone osteoclast, reduces bone resorption, and thereby it reduces calcium release from the bone into the plasma, and it is one of the major way by which it reduces blood calcium level. Another target organ for calcitonin is kidney. What does it do on that? Calcitonin decreases calcium reabsorption. Calcium reabsorption gets reduced, and thereby there occurs increased calciuria. Increased amount of calcium gets excreted through urine, and both of these action ultimately will help to reduce blood calcium level. Not only calcium, calcitonin has also effect on phosphate reabsorption. Like calcium, it also reduces phosphate reabsorption. So there occurs mild phosphaturia also. So under the influence of calcitonin, plasma phosphate as well as plasma calcium both get reduced. So this is the action of calcitonin over calcium as well as phosphate, and the main target organ being bone and kidney. So this is the major role of calcitonin in calcium homeostasis. Now let us see what are the other physiological roles of calcitonin. One thing I have already mentioned you, that calcitonin helps to reduce postprandial hypercalcemia. How it is possible? Whenever a person intakes food, there occurs increased tendency of hypercalcemia, but simultaneously, as there occurs secretion of gastrointestinal hormones like gastrin, CCK, secretin, they also stimulate release of calcitonin, and calcitonin by its various action reduces blood calcium level, and thereby postprandial hypercalcemia is prevented by the action of calcitonin. Calcitonin also helps to maintain blood calcium in pregnancy as well as in lactation. Why these two special situations? During and after pregnancy, the calcium demand of the body actually gets increased, and there occurs a tendency for mobilization of calcium from the bone to maintain the blood calcium level, and that is prevented by calcitonin. During pregnancy, what happens? Maternal calcium is actually used for bone formation of the fetus, and after pregnancy, calcium is utilized for lactogenesis. And to maintain this demand of calcium into the plasma, the hormone 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol level is usually increased, which causes increased bone resorption as well as increased absorption. If anyhow dietary supplementation gets reduced, the bone resorption takes the upper hand under the influence of activated vitamin D3, and there occurs weakening of the bones. This is prevented by increased calcitonin, which helps to prevent loss of calcium from the bone, opposing the osteoclastic activity. So this is one of the protective action of calcitonin during pregnancy and lactation to prevent loss of calcium from the bone. One thing I have already mentioned, that calcitonin and CGRP are found together in some brain regions like pituitary, hypothalamus, limbic system, where they act as co-transmitters, and they inhibit transmission of pain impulse in the CNS, which is independent of brain opioid system. It is an independent machinery for brain analgesia, calcitonin CGRP system. Now, calcitonin is helpful to reduce the overactivity of osteoclast in some genetic aberration associated with inadvertent activity of osteoclast like Paget's disease. In Paget's disease, what happens? There occurs some aberration in differentiation and proliferation of osteoclast. So excessive activity of osteoclasts are observed, which leads to resorption of bone somewhere and compensatory bone formation in some inappropriate areas. This aberrant activity of osteoclasts can be efficiently tackled by therapeutic supplementation of calcitonin. So this is another action of calcitonin. So these are overall physiological roles of calcitonin. Now, let us have some idea about how calcitonin can be used therapeutically and what are the clinical conditions where calcitonin may be tried. One thing I must mention, that there is no as such deficiency or hypersecretory states for calcitonin. Like all other hormones, parathyroid hormone 125 dihydroxycholecalciferol, that is vitamin D3, we have learned that there is specific hypo and hyper secretion and specific clinical scenario for that demanding therapeutic attention. But for calcitonin, no such deficiency or over synthesizing states are resulted. So whatever functions they exert physiologically is appreciated, but no clinical scenario is associated with their hypo or hyper secretion. Whenever there is really excessive secretion of calcitonin, like medullary carcinoma of thyroid, where there is excessive liberation of calcitonin from the neoplastic growth or cancerous growth or parafollicular cells, but actual calcitonin overactivity is not observed. Why? A phenomenon may be responsible for that, which is called calcitonin escape. Calcitonin escape phenomenon. What is that? Calcitonin escape is a phenomenon which results whenever there is prolonged excessive secretion of calcitonin, leading to prominent down regulation of the receptors responsible for its action. So receptor level down regulation may be responsible for the calcitonin escape phenomenon, which ultimately does not allow for the overactivity of calcitonin even when they are really synthesized or secreted in excess, like medullary carcinoma of thyroid. I have already mentioned that there is a condition called Paget's disease. In Paget's disease, calcitonin has been tried with promising results. So, something about Paget's disease. In this disease, there is increased osteoclastic activity. I have already mentioned you. This increased osteoclastic activity may be due to genetic aberration, and somewhere the etiology is quite unknown. The results is localized region of bone resorption followed by compensatory osteoblastic activity causing a patchy new bone formation, which is completely abnormal and inappropriate. Thus, Pagetic bones are structurally disorganized and susceptible to deformities. If we do X-ray, we will see that the areas of increased density and resorptive cavities will be visible on the radiographs. Though most of the patients are mainly asymptomatic, bone deformity resulting in excessive bone formation in inappropriate places may be there. There may be compressive neuropathy and subsequent neurotransmitter dysfunctions may be associated. This disease has been tried for management by daily injection of calcitonin. Calcitonin, helps to reduce osteoclastic activity, thereby bone resorption. So, compensatory bone formation will also be decreased. Bisphosphonates like etidronate and pamidronate, these are the bisphosphonates which also reduce osteoclastic activity, are also sometimes used along with calcitonin to tackle such situation. So Paget's disease is a condition where calcitonin has some definite therapeutic role. Another condition is post-menopausal osteoporosis, where calcitonin is often tried to reduce osteoclastic bone resorption and to keep intactness of the bone. You know that after menopause, as there is fall of estrogen level, the osteoclastic activity gets rampant and apoptosis of osteoclast gets reduced. Differentiation takes the upper hand by different cytokine liberation in absence of estrogen. So, there occurs prominent osteoporosis, and this is very common condition, and this has been tried with injection of calcitonin or supplementation of calcitonin, which one of the major suppressor of osteoclastic activity. So, by reducing osteoclastic bone resorption, calcitonin helps postmenopausal osteoporosis. So, these are the applied aspects of calcitonin. Now, something about other hormones. As I have promised at the beginning of my class, that today we will learn something about the role of other hormones in calcium homeostasis. So, let us focus on that. In brief, we will discuss what are the other hormones which are not actually calcitropic hormones. Their functions, their activities are something else. Their major functions related to some different organs, but they contribute indirectly or to some extent in calcium homeostasis also. The major hormones in this series are growth hormone. What does it do? Growth hormone increases intestinal absorption of calcium. It also increases calcium excretion from the urine, but the ultimate resultant effect is positive calcium balance. Whenever there is growth hormone deficiency, there occurs more calcium excretion rather than intestinal absorption. So, growth hormone leads to calcium retention in the body. It also helps to generate IGF-1, that is insulin like growth factor 1, which helps to form proteins which are responsible for bone formation. So, this is growth hormone. In growth hormone deficiency, there is stunted growth and there is negative calcium balance. Next is glucocorticoid. Glucocorticoid inhibits bone formation. It increases bone resorption. It decreases collagen synthesis and formation of mature osteoblasts from their undifferentiated precursors. So, bone formation is hampered. It increases apoptosis of osteoblasts and osteocytes, which are the functional cells for bone formation. So, overall bone formation activity is reduced by the action of glucocorticoid. It also reduces synthesis of IGF-1, which helps to synthesize proteins for the bone formation. Glucocorticoid increases bone resorption. That means one thing is it reduces bone formation, and on the other hand it increases bone resorption. It increases the levels of immune and inflammatory cytokines that stimulate osteoclastic proliferation and differentiation, and thereby osteoclastic resorption of bone gets enhanced. Glucocorticoid also enhances synthesis of collagenase. Collagenase is an enzyme which is responsible for the breakdown of collagen and thereby destroying the organic matrix of the bone. It also decreases the absorption of calcium and phosphate from the intestine and also enhances renal excretion of these ions. So, the resultant hypocalcemia is also responsible for the weakening of the bone and osteoporosis. So, a state of hypersecretion of glucocorticoid like Cushing syndrome, that is associated bone weakening and osteoporosis, steroid induced osteoporosis. These are the responsible factors. Next is estrogen. Regarding estrogen, I have already discussed in the context of osteoporosis that estrogen helps to prevent or to curtail osteoclastic bone resorption. On one side, it reduces cytokine mediated osteoclastic proliferation. On the other hand, it promotes osteoclastic apoptosis. So, after menopause, whenever there is fall in estrogen level, the osteoclastic proliferation gets disinhibited and apoptosis gets suppressed. So, overactivity of osteoclast leads to excessive bone resorption, thereby osteoporosis. Next is thyroxine or the thyroid hormone. Normal plasma level of thyroid hormone is essential for proper skeletal development, especially in the growing children, in the growing age. Congenital hypothyroidism, we know that cretinism is often associated with depressed skeletal development. On the other hand, hyperthyroidism, that is excessive secretion of thyroid hormone, may be associated with hypercalcemia, hypercalciuria and osteoporosis, excessive liberation of bone calcium. So, this is thyroxine. Optimum level is needed, neither hyper nor hypo, for proper skeletal growth and maintenance. Next is insulin. Insulin is the hormone which is required for bone formation, and there is significant bone loss and osteoporosis in untreated diabetes mellitus, wherever there is insulin deficiency. So, these are the class in nutshell today, where we learned about Calcitonin, its source, that is parafollicular cells of thyroid, its chemical nature, that is polypeptide hormone with molecular weight of 3500 and having a specific mechanism of action through cell surface receptor and cyclic AMP as a second messenger system. By acting on its specific target organ, bone and kidney, it helps to reduce blood calcium level in the bone. Its main target is osteoclast. Under the influence of calcitonin, osteoclast reduces its bone resorption power. Its activation gets suppressed. It loses its ruffled border, and by reducing bone resorption, the blood calcium level is decreased under the influence of calcitonin. It also influences reabsorption of calcium and phosphate through the kidney. It reduces reabsorption and increases excretion of calcium and phosphate through urine and thereby helps to reduce blood calcium level. The major stimulus for calcitonin release being hypercalcemia, calcium level more than 9 mg/% stimulates calcitonin release. Not only that, dopamine, beta adrenergic stimulators, gastrointestinal hormones like gastrin, CCK secretin stimulates calcitonin release. Calcitonin helps to reduce postprandial hypercalcemia. It prevents bone calcium loss in pregnancy and lactation. It maintains intactness of bone. It helps to reduce transmission of pain in CNS by acting as a co-transmitter with CGRP, that is calcitonin gene related protein. Therapeutic aspects, calcitonin is effectively tried in the treatment of Paget's disease, where there occurs inadvertent activities of osteoclasts. By reducing osteoclastic bone resorption, calcitonin improves the scenario. Also in post-menopausal osteoporosis, calcitonin has been tried, and for reduction of pain transmission in intractable pain, calcitonin is often tried. So these are the roles of calcitonin, and regarding other hormones, we have learned in brief the roles of growth hormone, estrogen, glucocorticoid, insulin and thyroxine. Thank you students. Today is the last class in the series of classes regarding calcium homeostasis and calcitropic hormones. I have covered all the salient portions of this chapter. If while going through you generate any questions or any queries or any hedginess in conception, please let me know. Write down your queries in WhatsApp, or even you may ring me up. I will try to address all of your queries and sort it out. Thank you. Please go through these chapters from any authentic textbook. Ganong's Physiology guidance are your authentic support for this purpose. And Indu Khurana you may also consult. It is also a reputed book. Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy.